Hi, everyone. So, this week's topic is presidential debates. This is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I spent 2 years of high school, 5 years of college, especially my super senior year, including 2 more years as a master's student when I was coaching debate. So, I spent all those years either debating or coaching high school and intercollegiate debate. These are roughly 7 years that I'll never get back. Nevertheless, it's a subject that's still near and dear to my heart, one that I really care a lot about, and one that I have some experience in evaluating. And the most important question that guides our discussion of debates is not just how do you win and lose a debate strategically if you're working for a campaign, but also what is the broader value for the citizens of the United States to witness these debates, and how does it influence or not influence the way that they make their voting decisions, or the way that they use their money to support candidacies, or any of the other things that you can do with your citizenship to influence your democracy. What I've done this week is I've made a clear split between the readings and the lecture. The readings, Carlin and Holohan chapter 9, and those readings you're likely to find a pretty robust, positive view of our current presidential debate system, in our debate system in the primary levels, and on down in the Senate races and House races, and at the local campaigns as well. These are two scholars who think that the presence of these debates is a signal of a democracy that handles its arguments quite well, that engages the other side, and that puts these two different competing philosophies on stage for voters to decide in a way that is perhaps imperfect, but it's always going to be to the betterment of the citizens. I'm going to take the other view. I'm going to take the soapbox view. I'm going to get up on my soapbox and make the argument that our presidential debates are not, in fact, debates at all. They are mostly just theatrical performances. At best, I think you could say that they are side by side press conferences in which the opponents have rehearsed lines. They've figured out what they want to say about foreign policy, about Social Security, about Iraq, about ISIS, about Syria, about the death penalty. They have very short speeches in which to make these arguments, and so they can sort of get up and say their memorized lines. And so, just like many campaign events are scripted, I think that these debates have become scripted as well. So that's the overall argument that I'm going to make, is that debates are not won rationally, they're won by performance. And so that's the key claim. Debates are not rational performances won by the better debater, by the force of the better argument, as Habermas might say, but instead they're won by performance. And what I mean by performance, we'll get into this specifically, is the use of zingers or powerful one-liners that are likely to be quoted in the media ad nauseum, and also the avoidance of gaffes, last week's topic, that make the candidate look silly, question the candidate's leadership style, especially under pressure, and also are quoted in the media, featured in the media ad nauseum. So I want to make just three specific arguments at the top about why I think debates are performances. They're judged performatively, like you might judge an actor in a theater performance or on a movie. Did he or she do a good job acting out a role, rather than argumentatively, like you would in a courtroom, or like you would if a scholar, historian, communication person was giving a lecture or a paper. So, three reasons why I think our debates are flawed towards performance, biased against rational judgment. The first one is that there's multiple topics in these debates. In many debates, there are topics like the economy, topics like foreign policy, topics like how to enrich the middle class. These aren't debate topics in a formal sense. These are very broad, generic topics. And so what that means is that it's impossible to judge a winner if there's no specific topic. For instance, in 1948, one of the very first debates was actually a primary debate between Thomas Dewey and Harold Stassen. And the topic was very clear. It was, should the United States government ban the Communist Party in the United States? And one guy said yes, and one guy said no. At the end of the day, the members of the audience, the supposed jury, members of the press corps could evaluate who answered that question better. It was a much more of an objective process than a subjective process. With multiple topics like the economy, it's more a question of, does the candidate speak well on the topic? Does the candidate avoid gaffes? Did the candidate have a few nice red meat lines, these zingers, that really got the crowd going, or really got his or her base going? And so it becomes more about that performative angle and less about how you answer the specific question. All right. The second reason why I think our debates are flawed is that there's incredibly short speech times. Typically what will happen is the moderators, so let's say Judy Woodruff or Bob Woodruff, will ask a question. How do you plan to enrich the middle class? Or what are you going to do about the national debt? Governor Bush. And then that candidate gets a minute and a half, 90 seconds, maybe 120 seconds to answer a question that economists, scholars, pundits, and other political professionals can spend the better part of a decade answering that question, delivering papers on that subject. And the presidential candidate gets 90 seconds to 2 minutes. And then, as a rejoinder, as a retort, their opponent gets 60 seconds to say what they want to say. And then the first person who spoke gets another 30 seconds to respond to what their opponent said. So it leads to very minimal argument development. In fact, I think it makes it fundamentally impossible for your average voter or even your member of the press corps who's more familiar with both the candidates and these subjects to make an evaluation of who's really debating rationally, giving better evidence than the other person, because the speech times are so incredibly short. Finally, I think that our debates are limited in terms of their value in our democracy by the limited interaction between the debaters. And what I mean here is this: if you picture a cross-examination, if I have a witness on the stand and I distrust what that witness's account of, let's say, a murder scene is, I can expose weaknesses in that witness's claims by asking them probing questions, by pointing out contradictions in their statements, by pointing out how faulty their memory is in particular circumstances about this particular murder scene that shed light on their lack of credibility. In other words, I can control the way that that witness is speaking by the use of offensive questions and offensive claims. Without that, without this kind of collision between a prosecutor and a witness, or in this case, the two candidates, you don't get to see how the person thinks under pressure. You also don't get to see how the person responds to somebody who doesn't agree with them. So you don't get to see how that person can defend themselves in light of opposing arguments and then make opposing arguments about the other person's case. And so without that, I think that the impact of the debate is substantially diminished. As a case in point, there's no such thing as a debate if we're not actually debating. If two people are standing side by side, delivering separate lines and trying to appeal to separate audiences to mobilize electoral coalitions, that's just side-by-side theatrical speaking, dramatic speaking. It has nothing to do with an actual debate in which there's a collision of ideas and there's engagement on behalf of one candidate against the other candidate. So those are my claims, and for the rest of this lecture, we'll try to develop those claims. And if you're looking for the other side, I've got those in the 2 readings for this week. And in the post, in your prompt this week, we're going to ask you to hash this out and figure out which side you support. Would you change the way we do presidential debates? Do you think that some of the arguments that I'm making have some legitimacy, or do you think that they're mostly fine the way they are, just need to be tinkered with perhaps, and thus the readings have it more right than I do?